We can.
Okay, great. So thank you for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here because I am a woman who coded rather. I haven't done it lately, but I think I still could if I wanted to. I'm really excited to talk to this group. It's great to see everybody, spending their time to come out here and listen. It's a really important topic, and I love talking about it because I think it's a topic that isn't talked about enough. So, you got a little bit about my background, but you're probably wondering, how did I get from IT to talking about gender? And what happened along the way is we decided we were going to start a women in technology, like a affinity group. And so I was working with the group and they asked me if I would do a presentation on how women could communicate better. So I did the research and found a lot of really good stuff that anybody can find about how we could use better action verbs and all that kind of stuff. But I kind of stumbled upon the gender information and started to do more research and got fascinated by it. And so instead of doing just regular communication, I did the presentation on gender. And I could tell that I really struck a nerve because I had all these people come up to me afterwards. Everybody wanted to talk about it. And then I started getting asked to speak all over the place about this topic. And so it was clear that it was something that hadn't been talked about enough and needed to be talked about more. So over the years, I have presented it many, many times. And I've had the opportunity also to present in India and China and Budapest. So very interesting, diverse audiences, and in all the audiences that has resonated that it is a topic we need to talk about. And it's kind of a complex topic. So I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you, and I'll have time at the end for you to ask questions, but I'm sure it's going to spark some thought. And this is one of those topics, I always say, it percolates. So you'll hear it and you'll think, I'm not sure. And then later you'll see something and you're like, oh yeah, I remember she said that. And so just know that it's going to percolate a little bit as we go through. So there's three foundational concepts I want to start with. The first is the impact of our childhood experiences. The second is brain science. And the third is the concept of team. So, if you look at the research on the way children play, all the research points to the fact that most boys, not all, but most boys will play games that have winners and losers. So they play with kids they like and they don't like, it doesn't matter. And they usually play in larger groups. So it's 3 or more. And through the type of play that they have, which is usually competitive, they understand how to navigate a hierarchy, how to be aggressive on the field, how to still leave and find some buddies later. But they don't necessarily carry their friendships that they make on the field out off the field. Girls, on the other hand, they don't really play games. They play with no end goal, and it's typically in groups of 2 or 3. And they only play typically with people they like. They don't play with people they don't like. And so that has some ramifications, as you can imagine, in the workplace. And so there's the types of play that has a lot of interacting with others, talking, sharing feelings, etc. So the best example I can give you is I have a son and a daughter. The daughter's the oldest. And so when she came along, being, this good mom, I was going to give her all kinds of toys and experiences that were not gender related. She had a microscope and she had trucks and, you name it. She had dolls. Every stereotypical toy you can imagine on any end of the gender spectrum was there, with a little bit of emphasis on STEM because I'm kind of a geek. So she had these toys, and I noticed that her and her girlfriends would take the trucks and they would play with the trucks, and either the trucks would talk to each other or they would be integrated into a Barbie scene somehow, but it wasn't like racing the trucks or that type of thing. Whereas what was interesting is I heard my son and a group of boys going through the house one day going, pew, 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 pew. And that's kind of the universal, I'm shooting a gun of little boy noise. And what they had done is they had ripped the heads off of the Barbies and they were using them as guns and running through the house and shooting them. Now, all the same toys, but used to play different games, in different ways. So at this point, I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, I'm a boy and I didn't play those kind of games, or I'm a girl and I didn't play that way. And yes, that's the beauty of diversity. Everybody's unique. And that's why we have a full spectrum of behavior on gender and how these things play out. I can tell you that I was the last of 6 children. The next oldest sibling was a boy. And so I ended up playing games with him, and I liked playing competitive sports. We shot bow and arrow. We did a lot of different things. And so I didn't play the girl games on here. So if you look at the gender spectrum from that standpoint, I'm definitely on the boy end of that spectrum. So I don't want you to go through as you hear me talk and think, oh, I'm on this side or that side, and this doesn't apply to me. What I think you'll find is that just like a personality disorder, there's various areas where you may be over here in one aspect and over here in another aspect. And, you can have the nature versus nurture debate all day long. And I think the answer is yes, they both apply. There is some nature, there is some nurture in all of it. But every unique individual is unique. And while I'm going to be talking as I go through here about men and women specifically, I'm specifically talking about the ends of the spectrum so I can be really clear for you as to what the behavior looks like. This is in no way attempt to say that women should behave more like men or men should behave more like women or any variation on that theme. It's more like a personality disorder so that you can identify things that might be happening and choose if there is something that you maybe want to change. So for example, I'll give you an example in my life. I recognized as I grew up, because I played predominantly with boys, that I didn't have very many girl friends and I played like a boy. And so when I tried to play with girls, they weren't really easily wanting to play with me. So, as I got into the workplace, I realized that some of those behaviors were also there, and I was putting off some of my female coworkers. So I actually decided to make a change. And, those are the types of changes that, you may decide to do or not based on what you hear. So anyway, that's, I'll get off my soapbox and keep going, but that's the intent here, is so that you understand the full diversity of what's going on. And, you can apply it as you see fit. All right. So I talked about science. Let's talk a little bit about science. So if you look at the male and the female brains, there's really not a lot of difference in the male and female brains. There's been a lot of studies over the years, are their brains really different? The truth is, the brains themselves aren't that different, but the way the information is processed can be different. And this is an example you see here. And this information came up in the last 15 years when the MRI technology got really more advanced, so we could tell what was going on in someone's brain when you're doing an activity. So on the left, you see the male brain. And what you'll see if you look at the lobes, so for example, you see the blue marks go on the left lobe and they go from the top to the bottom and they go kind of in that order. And then they may jump over to the right lobe and go from top to bottom. And then if you jump over to the female brain, you see that the information processes differently than that. So it's jumping from left to right, back to left, back to right, left to right, left to right. And predominantly more in the front or the top of the brain versus the male brain, the processing deeper into the lobe. So what does that mean? Well, what they've determined from that is that men are very good deep problem solvers because they go so deep on one particular lobe like that. Women, on the other hand, because you can see that they're jumping across the lobes, what's actually happening there is data connection. So it allows women to have a better memory, but it also allows them to connect disparate data points. And I believe it makes women particularly good at data analytics and that type of thing, because we're really good at spotting patterns, really good at connecting things that don't necessarily not everybody would see would connect. And so that's what you see happening there in the brain. Now, the other thing you may notice is the women's brain is very busy. And so it's really, I guess the best example I could give, this is a tech group, so I can give it, is think of it as an Excel spreadsheet. So let's say you had an Excel spreadsheet and it had 10 tabs. And on each tab, you had 100 rows and 100 columns of data. And so on the male brain, they would go to the first tab, process the data in the first tab, and then go to the second tab, process that data, et cetera. The female, however, would go to the spreadsheet and maybe go to tab 1 and get some data, then go to tab 7, then go back to tab 2, and then go over to tab 5 and connect all that data. So that's another really good way to think about it. But because of all that activity, like I said, the brain is extremely busy. So it's very difficult for women's brains to just rest. And there's a book out called Men Are Like Waffles, Women Are Like Spaghetti. And it's kind of a fun book. It's a little less technical, but the concept is that men are like waffles, meaning like a square waffle where you go from the one square to the next square to the next square. That's all in sequence if each of the squares are touching. Whereas women are like spaghetti, where every piece of spaghetti touches every other piece of spaghetti. But the concept that they put forth in that book, I really like, which is they call it a nothing box. So I don't know if you've ever asked, as a woman, if you've ever asked a man, what are you thinking? Most oftentimes the response you will get is nothing. And for a female brain, for us to think of you thinking nothing is almost impossible for us to think of nothing. So we think you're lying. For the men who are on here, we think you're lying when you say you're thinking about nothing. And what they've determined is that men have this ability to, it's not really nothing they're thinking about, but they may be thinking about something that's what we'd consider trivial or just, statistics or that kind of thing. So I asked my husband one time, he had a faraway look. I said, "What are you thinking?" And he said, "Nothing." I said, "No, this is for research. Tell me what you're really thinking." And he said, "I'm really thinking about I think it was the 1974 Dolphins with Dan Marino and something else." I'm like, "Okay, stop. I don't need to know anymore." But in his brain, that's, he was enjoying this thought process of that. Whereas women don't really have these kind of safe little spaces to, hide away a little bit because we're so busy searching for connection. So keep that in mind, because that busy woman brain really does play in a couple different areas. All right. The other is the concept of team. So if we ask a group of men, what is the definition of a team player? You'll get something like a team player is someone who knows their role on the team and plays it well. And so it implies that there's a hierarchy and they want to understand where they fit in the hierarchy and they want to perform their role well. Completely reasonable. If you ask a woman, however, you'll get something closer to a team player is someone who's willing to do whatever it takes to support the team. There's no evidence of a hierarchy necessarily. A good team player is willing to do whatever it takes to benefit the team, not necessarily the thing they do best. And they're willing to do several roles or put on several hats if it's all for the benefit of the team. So those are two very different definitions of team player. And it is kind of an example of how we come into the workplace. Let's say we come in out of college, male or female, not aware that there are really these differences, whether it be in brain or, in how we view teams or that how we've been socialized as children. And so we come into a team environment and we think that we're playing by the same rules. And when in some cases, we may not even be playing the same game. So if you think about it from a male perspective, their thought process is in a structural hierarchy and with the goal of staying as high as they can on that structural hierarchy. Whereas women are thinking, I want to make sure that this team is successful, and I'm going to do whatever I can and play whatever role I need to make this team successful. And those things can be actually quite conflicting. And I'll give you a couple examples of that as we go forward. All right. So these are the three areas in the workplace that we see the most where the differences play out. It's in performance and promotion, in conflict, and in group dynamics. So I talked about the team dynamic a little bit. Let me just dive down a little bit deeper. So if, when you see a group of men standing around talking, they many times will be talking, they'll be one-upping each other as, something like, did you see that goal I made? And then the next one will say, yeah, but it wasn't as good as this one. And so that, they're one-upping, trying again to stay as high as they can on the hierarchy. Women, on the other hand, are used to what is coined as power dead even. And so they're used to an environment where there really isn't a hierarchy. And so they may even behave and purposely lower themselves in a hierarchy to get connection, to gain connection with other people. And I know you're probably thinking, I don't understand this one. So I'm going to give you kind of a really practical example of what this looks like. So I was at an event, and it was an all-day event, and we had a break, and there happened to be an arcade. And so it was the team I was on with both men and women. And so we went to this arcade, and one of the guys was already on one of the machines where you do the downhill racer. I don't know if you've ever seen these, but you have to actually physically move your body and do the downhill racer thing. So he's on the downhill racer, and he's like, Jill, come over here. I can kick your ass at this game. So, he's inviting me to play with him by challenging me and, to compete with him. So I'm like, okay. So I go over there and I'm playing, and I'm really pretty awful at it, but so is he. And so another woman walks up from the team, and I'm like, hey, come over here and join us. And she's like, oh no, I'm not any good at that. And I'm like, oh, well, you can't be any worse than me. Look how bad I am at this. But do you see what I'm doing there? To try to get her to join in, to be a part of the team, I'm lowering or downplaying my ability so that she will want to become part of the team. Now, if you were just a casual observer to that, you might think that she wasn't very confident. When in fact, knowing all the people that that are in this scenario, she's the most confident of all the ones that I know. So sometimes we look for behaviors that we think show confidence. And in this scenario, it was trying to get connection. So there was a lowering of themselves in the hierarchy. All right. The next one is promoting themselves. So men tend to do self-promotion. They're very good at informally connecting with their boss, maybe before work or during lunch or on a break or on the way to the bathroom or, in the hallway or whatever. And they will compliment their leader. Now, oftentimes though, linguistically, they will use I versus we, with no intention and no forethought that they are going to take credit for things. However, that does sometimes come across that way. Women, on the other hand, think that their performance speaks for itself, and they oftentimes will use we instead of I, even when it's more of an I than a we. And it's really important. What's most important is that as an employee, your leader knows what you're doing at all times, and that you have a way to communicate to them what you're doing at all times. So this is one where the difficulty I think that women have on this one is if they have a male boss, is sometimes it feels inappropriate to invite a male boss to a drink after work or to try to get an informal connection. So you have to be creative with getting informal connections that are appropriate. And so that can take the form of setting up a regular weekly meeting, one-on-one, making sure they have the information. It can take a lot of different forms, but making sure that you're showing progress, not just big milestones. There needs to be an ongoing conversation. Whereas men tend to do this self-promotion naturally as they're trying to stay, like I mentioned, the hierarchy. They're trying to make sure that everybody knows all the good stuff they're doing. So that comes fairly naturally for men. It does not come as naturally for women. All right. So another area is learning style. Men tend to do as much self-study as they can before they ask for help or admit that they're in trouble. Unfortunately, if this goes too far, men will wait really long time and can get pretty far down the road of having a big issue before they'll ask for help. Women, on the other hand, ask questions readily. They ask for help readily. However, it's perceived, can be perceived as needing validation. I've heard this a lot. I've been, as an executive, I've been in a lot of conversations about should we move this person, this female, to leadership. And many times they'll say, I'm not sure she's confident enough, or she seems to need a lot of validation. And this is one of the areas where I think the perception comes across that females need validation. So, we learn in college, we're successful in college, that if you ask a lot of questions, that's a great way to do it. What I would say is make sure that you're only asking questions to your boss, male or female, doesn't matter here, that they need to answer at their level. If it's a question that can be answered by a peer or coworker or someone else, ask them instead. Because there are many studies that show that as a leader, if you have an employee, again, doesn't matter if it's male or female, if they're asking a lot of questions, your perception of their competence goes down. So asking questions can make the perception of competence go down. And it's one of the reasons, again, on the male side, that they choose not to do that, because they seem to understand that that is going to make their competence go down. But as you can see, there are issues with not asking questions too. So there has to be the right balance. And then decision-making. Men tend to get less input. Women tend to get more input. The right answer for this is it depends on the decision that needs to be made, and then how much buy-in it needs as to how much input you need to get and how you need to get it. But these are just the kind of the default positions of where men and women tend to lean on the amount of input. One thing on the women's side, I've got weigh options here. One thing that we see women do is want to socialize the options that they're considering and want to take those to their leader and socialize those options with the leader, with the hope of just having a great collaborative conversation. Unfortunately, as a leader, and again, whether you're male or female, doesn't matter here, when someone brings you a list of options, your first thought is, I'm going to make the decision. They want me to make the decision. Or they want me to fix the problem, or, whatever it is. So again, making sure that you're bringing in a recommendation if you're going to be weighing options. And if you're not ready to do that, then socialize those options with someone else before you take those into a leader. And, you go in and say, I recommend option A. We also considered B and C, and then have the conversation like that. All right. And then the final one in the performance and promotion area, and this might seem strange to be in the performance and promotion area, is discussing emotions and issues. Men tend to be indirect. They will not typically be really open with issues they're having at work or at home, or they're not going to come in and tell you how frustrated they are with their new puppy or their child or their spouse or any of those things. You will be clear though if they're angry. They show a lot of anger readily. Women, on the other hand, are very open with their emotions. You know, they will come in and talk about, you know, the bad day they had, how frustrated they are with the babysitter or the dog or whatever it is. And, you know, it may come with tears. I've had both men and women in my office crying. So it's not that women are the only ones that cry. However, women do have 6 times the amount of prolactin in their bodies. So they're more likely to cry when they're frustrated or angry. But the concern with making sure that you're showing the appropriate level of emotion, obviously, is from an anger standpoint, from a male standpoint, you have to make sure that you're not intimidating, obviously. From a female standpoint, if you're too open with your emotions, there could be the perception that you're overwhelmed. And so if, as a leader, if I have a promotion I want to give out and you're my good candidate, but I think that you're overwhelmed, I might wonder if that would be a good fit. Now, I've actually been in that situation and I had to coach myself to say, that's her decision. I know she's overwhelmed at home, but that's her decision to make, whether she wants to take on this extra project or not. Not every leader is going to have that conversation with themselves. So I just bring it up to make you aware that the more information you give, the more information they'll have when they're trying to give out extra work about whether if you're overwhelmed or that type of thing. Okay. Interpersonal conflict. So negotiating, and this is not negotiating the price of steel or anything like that. Obviously, there are methods and processes for doing that in most companies. This is negotiating when you don't necessarily think about it as negotiation. So it could be something like, we want to decide when we're going to go to lunch, and a man will open with a first demand. So he'll say, how about Friday at noon? A woman, on the other hand, will open with a question, which is more like, what day are you open? What's the best day on your calendar? There's no right or wrong to this. Either way will work. But, you just come at it a different way. Another great example is my husband's a teacher. He likes to go to yard sales. And he will often get a whole pile of things and go up to the person selling the stuff and say, will you take $5 for all of this? And I will do something similar. I'll gather up all the items, but I'll go up to the person and say, what kind of a deal will you give me for these items? Sometimes he gets a better deal. Sometimes I get a better deal. But you see the difference in the method, opening with a question. What happens sometimes, though, is we don't even know we're in a negotiation. So let me give you the example. I'm sitting in my office at 4:00 on Friday. My mail boss comes in and he says, I need you to give me that data by 8 a.m. on Monday. Now, he doesn't know that I have to fly to Florida for the weekend and, take care of my mom, and I'll be flying back in at 10 o'clock on Sunday night. So for me to get him that data on Monday, I'm going to have to pull an all-nighter on Sunday night to do that. So I could choose to give him all that information, but I'm not going to. What I could say, realizing that he just made an opening demand. His opening demand was 8 a.m. on Monday. I could say, hey, I'm going to be out of town this weekend. Is there any flexibility in when you need that data? And he might say, yeah, I got to have it by noon though. It's like, okay, great. At least that gives me 4 more hours. So it's recognizing that we're actually in a negotiation when someone comes to you with a demand like that, because sometimes we think that demand is a demand and we don't have any flexibility there. And, there's also sometimes a fear that they're going to think that we shouldn't be, pushing back on that. And you really, you don't push back on every demand that comes out, but if you've got a legitimate reason why you really need to question it, you absolutely should negotiate. And, there's a lot of data on negotiation. Most of it has to do with salary, and women have come a long way with negotiating salary, but I don't think we've come a long way with negotiating time. And I think time is one of those things that we really need to look at from a negotiation standpoint. All right. Handling conflict. Men tend to, well, they can openly argue and volley and call each other names and in the meeting, and then leave the meeting and go get a beer and be perfectly fine to immediately do that. Women, on the other hand, they may take the opposition personally. I'm being generous there. They will take the opposition personally, at least in my experience. And, you know, I'll give you an example. I was in a meeting, it was an all-day meeting, and we had to go to dinner right afterwards. It was a terrible meeting. We fought all day, and it was all men and two women, myself and another woman were in the meeting. We got to the end of the day. We hadn't resolved anything. We were still fighting up until 5 p.m. And someone poked their head in and they said, "Hey, we got to go to dinner." And they're like, "Okay, let's go." And so the guys got up, patted each other on the back and said, "See you at the bar," or "See you at the restaurant." And I went immediately back to my office because I was still mad. I'll be honest, my blood pressure was way up here and I needed to bring it down. And so it took me about 30 minutes to be able to process that to the point where I could actually go have dinner with these people. And I know that sounds petty, but it's true. The funny part is I got to the restaurant and the other woman from the meeting got there at the exact same time. And she said, "Oh, you're late too." I was so mad I couldn't leave immediately. I had to sit and process. And so, you know, I bring this up to say, you know, women have we have to process a conflict like that. Because remember, we're very strong on connection. We're very strong on team. We're very strong on cohesion. And so when there's a disturbance in the force, I'll call it, it's something we have to process. And it's better to just let people process it. So, you know, that's one of those areas where if you come across somebody who's angry and they're processing something from a meeting, just let them process it until they can, you know, get over it. All right. And the next one is giving feedback or giving directions. Men tend to be very direct on the you know, kind of negative end of that. They can be too direct. They can, if the tone's not appropriate, they can come across as intimidating or a bully. But they typically don't have implied meaning at all. Women, on the other hand, tend to be a little more softened or indirect when they give directions, and many times will give hints. And this is one of those areas where a woman's ability to bring in separate data, disparate data points, sometimes makes us draw the wrong conclusions if we think that particularly a male is doing these things to undermine us or try to, you know, get us fired, or, you know, I've been in quite a few mentoring sessions where somebody was certain that there was someone in the organization that was trying to undermine them. And when I talked to them about why they thought that, they were pulling together several different data points and saying, "See, that proves it." And my point to them was, why don't you just go talk to them about what they meant when they said this? And usually when they go and talk to them about what they said, they meant exactly what they said. So it's very important that we don't look for implied meaning that's not there. However, it's also, we have this ability to connect data points. So sometimes we do see things that are there. So it's important to discern, I guess is what I'm saying. And when you're having an interpersonal conflict, it's always best to go talk to the person that you're having the conflict with and just talk to them, you know, and don't talk to other people about it. Just talk to them and try to resolve the conflict. Now, this one, I think plays out a lot in relationships outside of work. So I'll give you the example, the hints example. It was 2 weeks before my birthday. My husband was sitting at the the kitchen table, I walked by and I noticed that Wicked was going to be in town the weekend of my birthday. And so I said to him, oh, look, Wicked's going to be in town the weekend of my birthday, which is a huge hint. And it seems like such a huge, obvious hint that I didn't think I needed to go any further. But I didn't go to Wicked for my birthday. And, I do this research. And so I asked him, I said, when I said to you that I liked Wicked and it was going to be coming to town, what did you think? Why did you think I was saying that? He said, I thought, yeah, she really likes Wicked, which is in fact what I said, but is not in fact what I meant. And so he would have had to, connect several data points and take action on that hint that I dropped him. And he didn't. And the good news is after I did this research and I've learned over the years that he doesn't pick up on those types of hints. He just doesn't. And so I don't even drop them anymore. And we're much happier as a result of our relationship because I just tell him specifically what I want. If I want to go to see Wicked on my birthday, I tell him, hey, let's go see Wicked on my birthday. And we're all happier for it. Now, I will tell you that there's this little piece of my brain that would love for him to pick up on my hints. And every now and then he does. And so it's always a bonus when he does. But I just don't expect it anymore. And we're all happier for it. So anyway, that's my little sideline there. All right. And then just a couple things on meeting dynamics, then I'll open it up for questions. So in meetings, one thing you'll notice, let's say there's a group of all men standing and talking together and a woman walks up. What happens? And I know you guys are all mute and everything, so I won't make you talk, but the men stop talking and they look at the woman to see if she's interrupting because she's going to join the group or if she's, just going to ask a question. And it's very awkward is the best word I can say. And I've done this experiment many, many times, and it all happens almost every time. All male group, woman walks up, men stop talking. So it makes the women think, oh, they don't want me to join their group. That's not in fact the case. It's just an interesting dynamic that plays out. If you have a group of women, however, talking and someone joins the group will actually physically open up and kind of envelop them. And if they're talking about a topic that may not be inclusive for all whoever joined, if it's all women and they're talking about childbirth, then they'll gradually change the subject and, make it more inclusive. What's really interesting about this, and the reason I bring it up, is the studies have shown that if there's even one woman in the group of the all men, the whole group becomes inclusive, as if there were all women in there. It's interesting, and it shows the beauty of diversity in the workplace, that diversity can make us better in many ways. And it does make us better in many ways. And that's one of them, in that just having a more diverse group makes the whole group more inclusive. And this is just one example of it. The other is nonverbal cues. Men are less likely to pick up on nonverbal cues. Women read them easily. It's interesting if you've had a meeting that you just didn't go well and you're like, what happened in that meeting? I don't know why that meeting was so bad. It's good to talk to both a man and a woman and get their read on the meeting, because often what you'll find is men will pick up on the content of the meeting, but women will pick up on the vibe, I'll call it, of the meeting. So-and-so was agitated and they looked anxious and they looked angry, or that, So it's really interesting to try to put all those pieces together. And again, the diversity makes for a better read on what really happened in that meeting. Now, women have an additional thing here in that they have mental replays. And I like to call them, well, they're like instant replay. Like think of a football play and then you play it over again. When we are in conversation or when we are at work and then on all the drive home, we will replay almost every conversation we've had in the day. Or if we're at a party, we will replay these things over and over in our head. It helps with memory that I mentioned before. It also makes our minds very busy, like I mentioned before. The risk that we run into is it can turn into what the term is called rumination. It's also the same term that is used to indicate a cow chewing its cud. So it's just chewing on something over and over and over and over and over again. So if you get in a rumination cycle, it leads to anxiety. And in fact, women have a much higher rate of anxiety than men. And a lot of it has to do with this ability to mentally replay things, but we need to be able to identify when a woman is in a rumination cycle, she needs to be able to kick herself out of it. Identify you're in it, number one, and kick yourself out of it, number two. And that's very helpful to make sure you don't get up the anxiety. I go through several things in the book that can help with how to kick yourself out of it, but just a couple of them, listening to an audiobook on your way home in the car from work. And I don't mean like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I mean something that really, connects to your brain, like the Hunger Games, something you really want to pay attention to. Will kick you out of a rumination cycle, because you can't actually listen and process language and mental replay at the same time. You also can't sing out loud and mental replay at the same time. So if you're a singer, singing out loud can be helpful. There's other tricks that you can do that will engage your mind so that you can't ruminate. That doesn't mean you won't come back and try to ruminate later, and then you got to kick yourself out of it again. But just be aware if you get into a mental replay cycle. All right. And then influence. So this is an interesting one. Research shows that men seem to know and are aware that there is a meeting before the meeting. So if you're trying to persuade somebody of something, let's say you've got a proposal and it's going to go to a high-level leader, there is a process where you will go and talk to the key stakeholders to understand their issues, and even the key leader that you're going to meet with prior to the meeting with the big group, so that they can talk about their concerns or issues and you can address them before you get in the big meeting. Women tend to think that the meeting actually happens in the meeting, whereas the meeting has actually happened a lot before the meeting. And so there's a perception, women can get the perception that, hey, they're meeting without me. And in fact, they are sometimes making decisions, because sometimes the decision is made without needing to have the big meeting. So it's important that women understand that to influence, if you're trying to get a proposal, it's important, especially if it's a male leader that you're trying to present to, to preserve their hierarchy, to preserve what they're doing, that they not get hit cold with this in a meeting, that there's actually some kind of warming up to it prior to the meeting. And that will get you in the dialogue and keep you in the dialogue and make sure that there aren't meetings before the meeting happening that you're not in. Because when they did the research on this, they actually found that the women were being left out of the meeting before the meetings. So, and many times, like I said, women weren't even aware that this was a thing. So it's important that you are aware of it, that there are meetings before the meeting, and it's a good thing to ask. I actually found out about it from a male counterpart of mine mid-career when I was trying to make a big proposal. And he's like, well, did you have the meeting before the meeting? I'm like, what meeting before the meeting? And so if this is a concept you're not aware of, it's one you should talk to a trusted male counterpart or other leaders in the organization and ask them what they think about that. All right. So I think that's the last. Yeah, it is. So this slide is just a summary of everything I talked about, because I just talked about a ton of stuff. So if this slide's up here, so if you want to remember any of the points or while you ask questions, you can have a reference here. It's also, if you're one of those people that likes to screenshot, feel free, screenshot it. So let's see, there's a lot of questions. I may have put on my glasses for this.
Yeah, I can jump in for a second because I've been monitoring your chat throughout.
Yeah.
A lot of just comments and agreeing, and people saying, "I've seen this in my own life. I do this. I've done these sorts of things that you're talking about." The one question that did come up, and everyone is free to chat, talk out loud, start asking questions as well. Put them in the chat, and I'll read them for you. Is I would love to hear ways that those of you who either manage women or identify as a woman try to encourage self-promotion among yourselves or other women within your workplace. It's something I've been working hard on with my all-female team to get them more comfortable with self-promotion.
You want me to weigh in, or does anybody else
Yeah,
want to?
yeah, I thought you could maybe kick it off with
Yeah.
some of the things that you've done over the years.
I think it's very helpful to have a consistent process. So to have a weekly one-on-one where the intent isn't self-promotion, it's update. But in the update, you're saying, hey, this thing happened or that thing happened. And so it's really helpful to have a regular rhythm. The other thing I think is helpful is whenever you get a win, even if a small win, it's like, hey, I finally got a breakthrough on this thing. Send it to your leader and say, hey, I got a little breakthrough here. Just wanted to celebrate with somebody, or run to their office, or, if you're remote, ping them on whatever your chat thing is. It's absolutely fine. In fact, they love to celebrate wins with you. So those would be my suggestions. Have a regular rhythm and, get used to celebrating the wins.
I don't know if anyone else wants to share their techniques. I personally maintain a document that, because I'm really, really bad at having those conversations where I just like drop links and various things in that document as an ever living document that we never talk about, but my boss has access to look at and see. And I'm like, we cannot talk about this. We cannot have a conversation, but these are the things I'm doing. These are the things people are saying about me. This is feedback I've gotten. It's all here if you need, when you need that.
Yeah.
I think I can chime in. My name is Pratibha. I work as an engineering lead, senior engineering manager at Target, and maybe it's not the exact answer to the question, but as a new manager on the team, I saw another women employee, in fact, like another male employee too, to not, when they used to have one-on-ones with me, they wouldn't talk what they have done and whatnot. So I had to give in, or I had to give a concrete example of my career when I was an individual contributor. So I started explaining to them that when I was working in HP Labs India, my manager told me, like when my manager was telling me to tell about my accomplishments to the research scientists that I was working with, and I was telling my manager that, hey, I don't like doing those show-offs, and like in that way, I mean, a similar note, I was talking to my manager, and then my manager immediately corrected me. It's not a show-off. It's you're not telling something which you haven't done. It's you're just giving the data points and you're just giving the updates. That way they know what you're doing. So giving that example to my direct reports helped a little bit, giving that concrete example. Hey, I was there in your same position, and that's how I learned it. I guess that's when they started actually documenting everything and started sharing with me, here is what I have done, here is where we can do improvements and whatnot. So I guess as a leader, you have to, influence your team to do that. So.
Yep. The other thing to remember again is, men are self-promoting and they're using I even when it's we. So if you're part of a we on a team, you better make sure that they know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're not getting any credit. And again, there's no evil plot or anything. I'm sure the men on this call can attest to the fact that it's not, they don't even know they're doing it many times. It's just a way of socialization, and it's the way they talk. There's no intent. And if you would ask them specifically, they'd say, oh yeah, I got a lot of help from, the team. But they, when they're talking, they'll talk about what they did. So it's really important, if you're part of a team and you're working together on something, that you get that information out there.
I was recently talking to one of our partners at our consulting firm, and he told me that in our self-reviews, I was the meanest person in the company to myself. So that was a good reminder for me personally, to like self-promote, because he said all I did was provide negative feedback on myself, and everyone else wrote very positive things and the good things that they did. And I was like, you have the document. Let's move on to another question from someone in our audience. We have a lot of students I work with. I work with the student-run Women in CS group from other areas of the world, particularly China and Asia and the Middle East. I have noticed some North American patterns don't seem to quite apply to them. Many of them are surprised at the huge number disparity for women in CS here in the US. Have you seen any research on similar patterns for non-North American differences?
There are a lot more women in CS in India, for example, in China. So that is true. There is a very sad low number of women in the US, or girls choosing to go that path. What's happening is, if a girl is going down a STEM path, she usually is either going medical or she's going like environmental engineering, that type of thing. And there's probably a lot of socio reasons on it, and I don't have actual study to back up, but I can tell you what I think my opinion is, because I've been in the industry for a really long time. I was there when the industry started, right? And the women first flocked to IT, and there were tons of women in IT when it first started. Then what happened over time was we ran into some walls, roadblocks, and realized that we weren't really making a lot of progress. That was one thing. Another thing that happened was there was a lot of outsourcing that happened. So the type of coding and things we were doing was now being outsourced to consultants. And so there was a shift to, maybe I should do more, either go to a consulting group or maybe not do this, maybe look for something else. And then the other thing that happened is a lot of those women that got into the coding actually got laid off at some point because they decided to outsource all that. So there's a group of moms going, no, don't go into that. You'll never get a job doing that. So that's my opinion. Take it for what my opinion's worth there. There's no research behind that one, but I have seen it in a lot of women that I've worked with, and, they were like telling their kids, no, don't go that route.
That's really interesting. And I don't think I've ever heard that take on why that number has decreased over the years. And I never really thought about it. But as a career switcher, if I had kids, I'd probably tell people my kids not to go into my first choice as well, to be honest.
Yeah.
Another question that popped up is, how do we correct them being mostly men, when they tend to use I instead of we to represent work?
It depends on the forum. So if you're like in a very small forum, you could probably correct them directly. And you could even say, hey, didn't so-and-so also work with you on that? And just casually, kind of bring it up. If you're in a really large forum, calling somebody out, especially a male in a large forum like that, will lower them significantly in the hierarchy in their mind, and you will make an enemy pretty quickly. So I wouldn't do that in a very large meeting. I would do it in a smaller one, or I would do it one-on-one if it consistently happened and it was happening to me. I wouldn't do it on behalf of someone else unless that person worked for me. So the person who it's happening to should be the one that says something, but sometimes that's not the case. So if you know, I've seen it. I've been in meetings where someone was talking about what they did, and I actually did say, well, didn't this person also work with you on that? And then they're like, oh yeah, they did this, this, and this. I'm like, oh, okay. I just wasn't sure the way you were talking about it. And nobody perceived that negatively, so I think you just got to be careful to be kind. I mean, nobody wants to be called out in a giant meeting. And you just got to do it in the right way. Because like I said, there's no evil intent there. And so you're not trying to knock them down a peg or anything like that. It's, it's just trying to make them aware that the language they're using is more I don't know. Any of the men on the call, do you have an opinion on what would work? Okay.
Totally fine. Any other questions? I've gone through the ones in the chat. If anyone wants to shout one out or have any discussions around anything that Jen said, or Jill, I'm so sorry. I put your name in my head one way, and it's really hard for me to break it once I've decided someone's name something. I apologize. Names are important.
And a question I would, kind of throw out to you guys is any of this surprising to you? Were there any areas where you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that?
Hi, I'm Josiane from Brazil. I'm a data scientist, and I'm the only woman in my whole team. So I identified myself in all of the aspects. Like how can I say, I make less of myself to make people more comfortable,
right,
and everything like that. I am super, I feel my emotions, and I get angry, and I have a feedback really, really harsh for me. That was, Josie, you cannot say that you don't know how to do something. First, you say that you know how to do, and then you ask questions. Oh my God, okay. And I think like, oh, it's no problem that I don't know how to do stuff. I'm a junior, but for him, it's like, it's a problem, and people see me as a junior. And I am a junior, but people don't need to see me as a junior,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I mean, it's hard to be the only female on an all male team.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be the only male on an all female team. It's hard to be the only any diverse group on a team. But it now that you've been made aware of some of these things, it's up to you to decide, maybe I'll do something different. Maybe I won't, it's really your choice. And, but thank you for sharing.
I think it will help me a lot. Thank you.
I don't know if I can share something, because I have also experience from North American job markets. Like, I'm European. I used to live in Poland. I mean, I'm Polish, and I used to live and work in Poland as the same as I used to live and work in Holland. And that's interesting because I used to work in only male teams, usually. It was very seldom when other woman was with me. And I used to be a motorsport judge, and also like in IT area, of course. And what I observed was then at some points, like all males started like treating me like another male, basically. Like I wasn't a woman for them. I was just a body, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and I know exactly what you mean.
And yeah, so actually many of these like phenomena you were speaking about, I have a little bit different experience. Of course, it's maybe just me being outlier or something, but it's maybe cultural thing also. At some areas, I was simply lucky because I never really had like bad experience working in male team. Even like in questioning authority, like you were talking about this dynamics about hierarchy and stuff, I'm very like non-hierarchical person. I don't really care about it at all. Like,
If I were guessing, I would say that you're probably a little further on the male end of the spectrum. And so you fit in really easily with the male team. And that was kind of, I've had that experience as well, because I had so much experience growing up competing with men, boys, that some of that behavior played well. And I knew, like on one team, I knew I was part of the team when they started calling me names. Because
yeah,
men
it's
call
really
each other
funny.
names all the time. Women do not call each other names. I promise you, the women don't call each other names and shouldn't, because if you do, they won't like it. But you can tell if you're part of a male group when you start to be in part of the banter and they start calling you names.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, but it was interesting to like observe because sometimes obviously I was like questioning some of their hierarchy, but actually they like it at some point. Then somebody came and like destroyed that like kind of false order almost, like took them out of roles and like rearranged it. I don't know how to properly word it really.
It sounds like you had a good experience. That's great.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this to you, Jill, when we were first talking about and planning this presentation, is that you mentioned that you made some changes to your personality once you identified some of these things. And I also had made some changes to my personality to kind of move towards a more like male side of the spectrum. And I always just get really frustrated when I see these, because I still relate so much to the women's side of the spectrum. I'm like, I do that, I do that, I do that, I do that.
Yeah. And I think, it's not a one size fits all. So for example, I was there was a party at my house this past weekend, and it happened again where I was standing in a group of all men. And it happens almost every party. I end up as the only female in a group of all men. And I'm like, darn, I keep trying to change that. Why do I keep ending up being the only woman in a group of all men? And so once I'm aware of it, I look around and go, uh-oh, it's happened again. I'll start to, try to be more open or social with, the women in the room and et cetera. But I find, because my natural behaviors are more on the male end of the spectrum, that at a party, I will end up with the men talking about technology or something. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, you have to, I find that if I'm in a group, let's say I go to a book club and it's all women, I have to really check my behavior or watch my behavior to make sure I'm not doing things they would consider too direct or intimidating. And over time, I've learned, how to do that. And I've got lots of topics I can talk about that aren't technology or, sports or that kind of thing. But it's taken a little bit of effort on my part to actually recognize it. And it wasn't until one of my friends basically said, "You're really intimidating." And I'm like, why? I'm a nice person. So, I had to kind of do a self-check there to understand what was driving that perception.
Kelby, do you want to unmute and ask a question?
Yes. Hello. One, I want to say thank you for presenting today. But my question for you was in regards to, I think you kind of hinted on it just now, which is really the conversation about being aggressive versus assertive. And a lot of times that conversation, I struggled with that for quite some time, because when I do get the energy and I feel that I need to take control of this space, it seems that people are like, wow, you're really aggressive there. But then it may not necessarily, it may not necessarily rub the right way. And it's like, or it seems very different from how you are normally, but I'm like, I need to say something, I need to do something. Like just now, I just raised my hand to speak. I noticed that sometimes on my teams, they don't necessarily allow opportunity for other people to speak if you're not very, very direct and maybe outspoken. So I just wanted to just ask you about that, like how to overcome maybe when people are speaking over each other, or just, be more assertive and not necessarily aggressive, and, the other words that they call you.
Let me touch on, that's a really good point. Let me touch on the aggressive, the assertive thing. There's a couple of things there, and I actually write quite a bit about that in the book. But what studies show, if you look at feedback that women get in the workplace, they get disproportionately more feedback on how their social behavior is versus how they performed on their job. So they get a lot more about how rough their communication is, or how assertive they are, or how assertive they're not, or that kind of thing. And so I'll tell you from my own experience, my very first performance appraisal was, you're not assertive enough. My second performance appraisal was, you're too assertive. Now, did I overcorrect? And kind of what you're saying, they said to be a little more assertive, or you needed to be a little more assertive. So you asserted yourself, and then they're like, whoa, wait a minute. That's kind of assertive. We're not, well, now you're aggressive. We don't want that. There's like this Goldilocks version of assertiveness. And the sad part is, the right amount of assertive for any woman is dependent upon the person that is evaluating how assertive you are. So everybody has their own bias or their own perception of how assertive a female should be. And if you've been a certain way for a while, then if you do turn it up a notch, they're like, whoa, something happened. But there are some people that any amount of assertiveness would be too much for them, coming from a female. And so there's this I wish I had a good answer for you, because I really don't. But it's something that is, study after study shows that the right level of assertiveness is elusive for every female, because it is a totally different evaluation depending on who's evaluating you. Mm-hmm. So what I would say to you is, be assertive enough so that that they know how good your performance is, and that you are getting your points across in meetings and you're raising ideas. The other thing I would caution you on is, don't only be assertive when you disagree. So one of the things I did early on is I started to get more assertive when I disagreed in meetings. And my boss was like, you don't speak up enough in meetings. And I said, well, what do you mean? I mean, I really speak up when I disagree. I'm not going to let something go by. And he said, but you only speak up when you disagree. And he said, why don't you ever affirm and say, oh, good job, or, oh, I like that idea, or, oh, hey, here's another idea. And so the next year I focused on trying to just find things that were positive to say in a meeting. And I know that sounds funny, but it was kind of an experiment. And so I did that. And my boss said, you totally fixed that behavior. You're participating, you're assertive enough, things are going great. But the only thing I changed was I just said more positive things in meetings. And for that leader, that hit the button that he was trying to have me change. But it's a very difficult thing, because sometimes when they're telling you to be more assertive, they can't really articulate what it looks like. They just know when you do too much of it.
Awesome. Thank you.
We had 2 more questions pop up in the chat, and then we probably will wrap up to be respectful of everyone's time, including yours, of course. Ashley asked, I personally do feel a bit intimidated by men, and I have a harder time speaking up or making my point. Easier to just agree instead of asking questions. So how do you get up the confidence or the courage to open your mouth? I did not grow up with brothers, and I'm sure that has a part to play in with that.
Yeah. I think practice helps. I think really caring about the outcome helps. So, if something is your idea and they're coming back with criticism or that type of thing, and you really care about it, you're going to defend that thing more. But if this is just kind of a, thing you're talking about and you don't care that much, it's hard to be more assertive or really jump in with your ideas. But I would encourage you to just practice jumping in. Even as simple as someone mentioned raising their hand in a meeting like this. In a large group, say, I'm going to ask a question no matter what in this meeting. And just practicing doing it. And then seeing what the response is and knowing that none of this is personal. Remember I mentioned how boys play on the field? They leave everything on the field and then go get a beer afterwards or whatever. None of it's personal. It's all, think of it, they're all thinking of it as a game, and there are a lot of books written about the mindset of males in the workplace, but a lot of times it's very much like they're playing a competitive game. And if you haven't played competitive sports, it might be tougher for you to kind of understand how that shift happens. But the reality is it's a compartmentalization. So you have to know that they like you fine as a person. It's a compartmentalization of the topic. So they might challenge you on a topic, but that doesn't reflect anything about you as a person. Whereas when females get in conflict, there's more of a personal thing going on there. And so I think it's a realization and a recognition that it's not personal. And just get the courage to just try it and do it. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Will you ever be great at it? I don't know. I mean, I'm not great at it. And I've been doing this for many, 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 many years. But I've learned that I have to kind of just sometimes I'm like, oh, you get that feeling like you're jumping in, even though you don't want to, I'm going to do it, even though I really don't want to. It may never be natural for you, I guess is what I'm saying. And in my personality type, even though I'm very direct, I really don't like initiating conflict, something that I know is going to be conflict. So when I do it, I know I'm doing it, but I really kind of brace myself still. So you may never get past the bracing yourself, but what you have to get past is the doing it. You have to go ahead and do it, because you'll find that you'll be a lot more effective, and it's never as bad as you make it in your mind you think it's going to be. And you'll find that after a little while, it gets a lot easier.
I would just add that I often write notes in a notepad and I have them up in the meeting and I read them directly from that. And that's kind of part of my pump up process to say something harder than what I would normally in a conversation.
That's a really good point, actually. If you kind of think what you're going to say, if it's something where you're going to have what you're going to say and you're going to say it, if you write out the words like you want to say it and write out every word and then go back and look at it and look at, are there any filler words that make it too soft, or is it too harsh? I mean, did you take all the filler words out and it comes across as, wow, that's really harsh. So, maybe even have someone you trust, a coworker, say, look at this communication. Do you think it's the right tone? And then just, have it up on the screen. And that's really helpful if you're remote. If you're in person, you can't hide behind that, but.
Emily also asked a great question. Would you say there is more value in, one, moving people away from the extremes of the spectrum? I know you called out that we were talking about the extremes at the beginning, or two, just generating an awareness, understanding of these differences and meeting people where they are?
I think it's very individual. I think there are some of the places where people are that could be hurting them. So if you're not getting promoted and it's because you're constantly asking for validation or questions or that kind of thing, you may need to make a tweak there. But on the rest of it, just an awareness and meeting people where they are is perfectly fine. But you got to determine for you if you're being harmed by any of the behavior, if you've taken it too far to either of the extremes. because, you know, most people aren't on the extremes. Most people are somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one. Otherwise, I just want to thank you, Jill, so much. There has been so much activity in the chat while you're talking about people just relating to things you're saying, finding patterns in their own behavior, things that they either want to work on or just understand a little bit better about themselves. So I just really appreciate you being here, joining us, hanging out for the last hour and a half to talk and share your knowledge.
Yeah.
All of us. Yeah.
Well, the last thing I will tell you is if you like the topic and you want to go deeper, the book's out there. I do have an entire section on, so here's the book, a link if you want it. It's on Amazon and it is available in other countries. I saw there's some other country folks in there. I'm not sure if it's in all the countries. I'm not sure if it's in Brazil, but I know it's in Canada. But anyway, there's whole sections in there on how this plays out with your personal relationships too. So there's the section on work that we covered a lot of, but there's still a lot of research and a lot of examples in there. And then the whole personal side is in there too. So if it's a topic you like to read about, feel free. It's a short book. It's not a long book. Nobody likes a long book.
And there is a direct link as well in the meetup information.
Okay, perfect.
If you want to go out and find it.